Ladies and gentlemen, peace be with all of you. It's an honor and a pleasure to welcome all of you to the virtual webinar, the second webinar held by Emirates Policy Center to look into the Ukrainian war and the ramifications of this war. After we have discussed yesterday the geopolitical and geo-economical consequences of the war in Ukraine, today we will be focusing on the strategic consequences of the war in Ukraine on the Middle East. The world still anticipates what will happen as a result of the war in Ukraine and the consequences of the war in Ukraine, which will not be limited to Ukraine, Russia, and the European continent alone. It will also include the whole world. One of the most important areas of the world that will be affected by the ramifications of this war in the Middle East, which will face political, geostrategic, and economic consequences of this war since day one of the war in Ukraine. On the 24th of February 2022, the critical position of the countries of the region with regards to shaping a political position on the Ukrainian war has been clear in light of the interests that these countries have with Russia on the one hand and the United States and the European countries on the other. Moreover, the analysis show that the war and the crisis in Ukraine will lead to further political polarization in the region and will cause an international coalition on each side between the West on the one hand and Russia on the other, not to mention the possible ramifications on the crisis hotspots in the region. Moreover, these analyses have shown that there is geopolitical stances of new nature or geostrategic alliances that may be shaped in the region in case the confrontation between the West and Russia escalates for a long time. While the political ramifications and geostrategic and consequences are still to be anticipated, the economic impact of the Ukrainian war has become quite evident instantly with the skyrocketing of oil, gas, and prices of international commodities, particularly forward contracts of wheat, especially that this highly strategic commodity is threatened in terms of its supply. I don't want to delve into the details of these issues. I'll leave this to the webinar, which will look into three key categories or three key elements. The first element has to do with the political aspects and the different stances of Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, and other countries of the region and their position on the war, and the interests that they have with Russia and the West, and how the Ukrainian war may affect the nuclear deal with Iran and the crisis in Syria, Libya, and Yemen. And the second element will focus on the geostrategic dimension by discussing the ramifications of the Ukrainian war on the international and world order and also on the regional order. It will also discuss the results of the war with regards to geostrategic positions of the countries of the region and the future competition between Russia and the US and the Russian-Chinese coordination in the region. The third element of our discussion today will highlight the potential impact of the Ukrainian war on the economies of the region and food security as well. It will also highlight the challenges and the possible potential for oil and gas and the OPEC Plus agreement. To discuss these topics, it's an honor and a pleasure to have with us today a host of experts, renowned experts, namely Dr. Zaid Ayadat, the director of the Strategic Studies Center at the Jordanian University and a professor of international relations at the same university, and Dr. Qadir Austin, the director of the Political Research and Economic and Social Studies Center SETA in Turkey, in Washington, and the specialist and expert in political affairs. We have with us also Dr. Mamdouh Salam, an international expert in oil and gas, and a visiting professor at ESCP University in Europe for Business Management in London. And we also have with us Dr. Mohammed Zaghul, a senior researcher at Emirates Policy Center and the head of the Iranian Studies Unit and an expert in Iranian affairs. I would like to welcome all of our speakers for this evening. I would like to thank them for accepting our invitation to participate today with us in this webinar, which is held via Zoom and which is being broadcast live on EPC's accounts on YouTube and the different social media channels and YouTube channel as well. Now we'll start with the positions of international powers and the ramifications on the region. I will address my first question to Dr. Zaid Ayadat. Dr. Zaid Ayadat, how do you evaluate the positions of Arab countries in general of this war in Ukraine? And what are the considerations and calculations that have affected these positions of these countries? Do you believe that these countries will shift if will the war takes a long period of time or if the war between the West and Russia expands? Please activate your mic. Sorry. Good evening, Dr. Tassam. Good evening to you and to your guests. We have a host of experts today, and I'm very proud of having them today. And I would like to thank you very much for this great effort, which is exerted by the Emirates Policy Center, which always tries to anticipate and read between the lines and anticipate the developments at the level of the political economic developments through scientific analysis that gives us insights to make the proper decisions. Back to the current situation, let me start with the overall image. Speaking of the different positions or the potential positions and how they may develop with regards to the main stakeholders and the position on the war in Ukraine, we need to understand also the impact on world order and the struggle and conflict among the positions of these countries. Let's start by saying that the war started because of specific strategic calculations for each side, regardless of the justifications or the different narratives that have been produced around the key players, whether by Ukraine or Putin himself, with regards to the decision-making process itself. But obviously, there is a consensus among researchers that despite the important strategic track, maybe this was not a well-calculated decision. I mean, the decision to go to war was not a strategically sound decision. What we see today, we need to name things the way they are. Maybe this is the end of the unipolar system of the world, which has been dominant since 1989 up till now. This reminds us, and we need to remember this in its historic context of what happened in the era between the war, the end of the First World War, and the end of the beginning of the Second World War. As many people pointed out, this was called in history by historians in the 20th century, it's the post-war era. But after the Second World War, it was called the interwar, or the period between two world wars. And this is what we are witnessing today. We were speaking of the post-Cold War era and the Soviet Union and so on. But now we are talking about the end of the unipolar world order, and that the world is heading towards different geostrategic positions that will pave the way for a new era in international relations. Another issue is associated with this analysis to understand the positions of key countries in the region, which is how to the war itself, how will it evolve? Another point here is that we need to realize that the key objectives of Russia and Ukraine is not to occupy Ukraine, because this will be difficult, not militarily, but politically it will be very costly. But if this is not the objective, then Russia will be just annexing other areas of Ukraine to the east to increase the area which separates Russia from the West, and also instating a political system or a regime in Ukraine that will be loyal to Moscow to ensure that in the worst case scenarios they will be affiliated with the Russian politics. The danger that we're facing today because of The fact that Ukraine is a neighboring country for four NATO members, and the fifth one is the uh, maritime area with Turkey. So any miscalculation in geostrategic and military calculations can cause a conflict and may even um, expand this war between Russia on the one hand and the NATO on the other side. And this will have major consequences. Today, we're talking about the reaction of the West, the USA and the NATO to this war with regards to the economic sanctions and also the potential impact on Russia and the Russian system, and also on the different dynamics of the actions of the Russian president to these sanctions. This is the general overview. Now let's see why uh, the key countries in the Middle East have taken their positions in this case. There's a case of anticipation in the Middle East. When we speak of the Middle East and the world is witnessing transformations, we are witnessing that the Middle East has also been witnessing difficult transformation to produce a new geostrategic system and a different strategic order that is different from the situation that we had before the Arab Spring. This alternative system and arrangement is still being shaped, and there have been some pushbacks and some uh, progress. However, 4 or 5 key states in the region, Turkey, Iran, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Israel, and they have been playing a major role in this uh, shaping of this region, and they have their own calculations with the different members of this region. We GCC states, in particularly, uh, we speak of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. We know that the issue of confidence in U.S. security guarantees has become in question. Therefore, aligning with the American side in all its conflicts and policies is no longer something that is guaranteed in the American foreign policy. So, particularly when there is no superior American interest and the stakes are not too high, if a massive American interest on stake, they will use the leverage and influence their allies and the stakeholders in the region to adopt specific positions. But because there is no such higher strategic interest for the US in adopting specific position in this case, we know that the problem here in Ukraine is that Ukraine represents a key strategic interest, an absolute and existential interest for Russia, but it does not occupy this status for the USA, and therefore, and as a consequence of this, the allies of the US in the region are still adopting some sort of a patient calculation and a patient position on this regard, and reading out how will the war develop there. If things remain contained, then these countries do not have an interest in uh, disengaging themselves with the relations that they have established economically and strategically and politically with Russia, because Russia is a key player also in some areas of conflict in the Middle East. And the most glaring example actually is the Israeli position. The Israeli position, because of the prominent role that Israel plays in the Syrian crisis and the mutual understanding between Russia and Israel with regards to the military interactions by Israel with the Syrian scene, particularly airstrikes which target Iranian forces and Hezbollah in Syria. Then Israel adopted a position which is quite clear, as it is not supporting the Western position in an absolute manner. However, it wants to become a mediator and wants to uh, remain on an equal distance from both sides. The same applies to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which has a host of genuine interests that have been established between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Russia, and there are also the implications of the vacuum that was created in Afghanistan and the possibility that Al Qaeda may return, and also the energy market and maintaining specific prices for the energy market. This is having a major strategic impact. That is why it is also very wise to adopt positions which are fully aligned from the beginning with a certain side. But the longer the war goes on, and the ramifications go on, the position of these countries will change. I will be speaking about how this will. Just wanted to highlight a quick overview of this position. Sorry for taking too much time. However, I wanted to put our map. Thank you, Dr. Zaid, for this uh, uh, panoramic picture of the situation. The discrepancy that these countries have been on, on a position of polarization between China and the United States of America. Now they are facing another situation of polarization between Russia and the United States of America. Moving on to Dr. Qadir Austin. Dr. Qadir Austin. Dr. Qadir, despite the fact that Turkey tried to become very cautious in its position and well balanced in its position towards the war in Ukraine, however, how do you interpret the Turkish position regarding Ankara's decision to implement Montreal agreement with regards to Bosphorus and Dardanelles straits, and the fact that Turkey supplied Ukraine with 12 drones from Bayraktar drones, and voting with the General Assembly of the UN decision, which condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Do you believe, Dr. Uh, Dr. Kader, do you believe that Turkey can maintain this very cautious and very well balanced position if the war continues for a long period of time, or if the crisis becomes wider and bigger, especially that Turkey is at the end of the day a member of the NATO on the one hand, and also there are many intermingled interests with Russia that Turkey has with Russia. And Turkey relies on the natural gas flowing to Turkey from Russia and also oil. So, what are the considerations that will govern Turkish policy in this particular situation?
Thank you very much. Thanks to Emirates Policy Center for inviting me to this really timely discussion. I appreciate it. So as you mentioned, Turkey has already taken important steps, concrete steps regarding the war in Ukraine. Turkey first called it war, which allows Turkey to implement the requirements of the Montreux Agreement. Montreux Agreement in times of war allows Turkey to prevent war ships going through the Turkish straits. But if they are these ships, if they're registered already in Sevastopol, if they're simply returning, Turkey has to allow them to return. But other than that, Turkey can prevent warships from using the Turkish straits. So, as you mentioned, Turkey has strong relations with both Ukraine and Russia. Turkey is a NATO country, and Turkey is going to be impacted by this crisis, and it has already been impacted. But at the same time, Turkey is also trying to find a solution, diplomatic solution. It was just announced that Ukrainian foreign minister and Russian foreign minister will meet this weekend in Turkey, in Antalya, and Turkey is trying to find a diplomatic solution to this. At the General Assembly, as I said, Turkey condemned the vote, joined the vote to condemn this action by Russia and called it an invasion. But at the same time, as I said, Turkey has interests and multi-dimensional relations with both countries, trade, tourism, military relations, diplomatic ties, and also throughout the Middle East, in Libya, in Syria, in South Caucasus, in Central Asia, Turkey has to deal with Russia on the ground. So Turkey hasn't adopted sanctions against Russia, and it is unlikely to do that. But Turkey has already helped Ukraine a lot, as you mentioned. Turkey already sold drones to Ukraine. Of course, for Turkish defense industry, these sales are not relevant, are not about strategic sort of use of them. It's the Ukrainians who are using it, but this shows Turkey's level of engagement with Ukraine. You asked if the conflict is long, if it's a protracted conflict, can Turkey maintain this status? Of course, it's going to be difficult, but the same question needs to be asked of the West as well. This is the kinds of sanctions they have imposed against Russia. It is not easy to sustain them in the long run, and especially if they have to maybe impose sanctions on oil sales and natural gas sales, this will hurt Europe itself. The same thing is true for Turkey. If Turkey were to adopt sanctions against Russia, this would hurt Turkey's economy. And that's why number one priority for Turkey is to secure a ceasefire that will stay, that's a long-term ceasefire, and then find some sort of negotiated solution, because as we know from other conflicts in the region, there is no military solution to these conflicts, and there's often huge humanitarian cost. There's already 1.5 million refugees from Ukraine, and as you know, Turkey has a total of 6 million refugees from various countries. 4 million of them are from Syria. So Turkey knows that experience really well, but the West hasn't acted in the way that regarding the humanitarian situation from Syria, they didn't really act in a smart way. In Ukraine now, they're accepting all these refugees into Poland and other countries, but in the long run, this is a huge challenge. It's difficult to address. So I think Turkey will do its best. It will do its best to find a political solution. That's number one priority. But if the conflict does not get resolved months, you'll see probably humanitarian aspects of this conflict worsening. So that's not good. And the West also has to work on the diplomatic level.
Thank you, Dr.
شكرا
قادر.
دكتور قادر.
الآن لدكتور
دكتور زغول.
زغول.
دكتور محمد زغول.
يعني أنا يمكن يعني أدمج سؤالي في سؤالين.
This question, the Iranian position was clearly siding with Russia in the war in Ukraine, and Tehran voted against the resolution in the General Assembly of the UN. The question that I'm asking here at this point, what are the determining factors and the considerations which govern the Iranian position? And another point, when we speak of Vienna agreement, there are some analysis which refer that the USA will accelerate the Geneva Convention, will accelerate Geneva talks in order to restore the Iranian oil on the market, to reduce the skyrocketing oil prices, and also to pave the way for imposing further sanctions on the oil sector in Russia. Is this analysis, from your perspective, an accurate one? Do you support it? Moreover, how do you interpret the latest Russian position with regards to Vienna talks about the Iranian nuclear program, for asking written guarantees to ensure that the Western sanctions would not undermine the cooperation with Iran? Do you believe that this is a Russian attempt to delay the nuclear deal, despite the fact that Iran supported the Russian position with regards to going against the West? Good evening, Dr. Abdeslam. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I also would like to welcome our dear speakers and guests. First, I would like to say that there is a host of elements that make the Ukrainian crisis a wide-ranging crisis and its impact on the Middle East, given what other regions are doing. They have to do with the fluidity of the regional order that we have and the wide gap between the different active powers in the region and the differences in their positions and the fact that the region is actually exposed to foreign intervention at a large scale. And this boosts the scope of this crisis. However, given the special situation of Iran and the fact that Iran is the only country in the region that has a clear vision of hegemony on the region. And this hegemony project of Iran made it, at the end of the day, engaged in a number of conflicts with the regional and international powers. And this makes Iran, of course, influenced and also influential to the world order compared to other regional powers in the region. The conflict that we've been witnessing in Ukraine has been happening at a time when Iran was very close to signing a nuclear deal and getting back to the GCPOA of 2015. It seemed like Iran was very likely to obtain this deal. However, Russia is a key player in shaping this deal, and it cooperates with China and the USA in this regard. However, it seemed at the beginning that Iran is quickly adopting a position which supports Russia. There was a talk, a quick analysis from my perspective, that the NATO's expansion to the east is the main justification for the option of this conflict. However, even we have not even seen this in the UN Security Council. One time, we've not, also Russia has been focusing on categorizing the Houthis as a terrorist group. It seemed that the Iranian-Russian relations have been tactically affected by the situation. So the Iranian leadership started speaking of rejection of occupation, and it abstained from voting in favor of Russia. And also, it seemed that there are calls by Russian side that have to do with the nuclear deal, in which Russia says that it wants that all the signatories of this agreement of the nuclear deal will have equal opportunities to establish economic relationships with Iran. And part of this Russian request was that Russia must also obtain the ability to exchange radioactive material with Iran within the framework of this deal without any restrictions. And this, and since there is a history inside Iran that the former minister spoke of in terms of Russian attempts to undermine reaching a deal, and the Iranians still remember this history. It seems like the Iranians felt that the Russian side is trying to undermine reaching a new deal with Iran, or at least to impose new conditions through which Russia can reap the benefits of participating in this dialogue with Iran. Therefore, the Iranians have also shifted their positions to reflect the political distance between the two sides, and the input of other sides is very important. And the head of National Security Council, Shamkhani in Iran, said that Russian interests are important, but Iranian interests are the ones that matter the most, and that Iran will try to figure out new ways to coordinate this interest. It means that the Iranian crisis are beginning to cast shadow on the Iranian-Russian relations. At the end of the this conflict, it does not necessarily mean that the Iranian side will shift towards supporting the Russian side completely because of the crisis in this regard. And actually, these elements may, at the end of the day, drive it to support Russia. However, the Iranian position seem to be, with the geopolitical situation, different in this regard. However, given the relationship between that are governing Iran relationship with China and Russia, up till now, the Chinese position, and up till now, China does not have a clear position on the conflict other than trying to reach some sort of a settlement and speaking of the principles of the uh, Chinese position. But inside Iran, there is a great deal of pressure on Iran, which keeps speaking about the principles of the revolution. After adopting a position supporting Russia, according to the Iranian constitution and the Iranian principles of this regard, and the issue of supporting national liberation movements, it seemed like the Iranian people have been angry with the initial position of their leadership. That is why the leadership had to reiterate they reject occupation. So there are international ramifications for Iran that are based on this regard. I will discuss the economic side in the upcoming part of the discussion dialogue, Zaghul. I would like to thank you. I will move on to Dr. Salama. Dr. Mamdouh Salama. My question is about the issue of Iranian energy resources. How far do you believe this position will have an impact on the American position on the nuclear negotiations in Vienna? Will Iranian oil and gas resources affect the situation in globally, or make up for the Russian losses, or withdrawing the Russian oil and gas from the international market? Dr. Mamdouh Salim. Dr. Mamdouh Salama. Dr. Mamdouh Salama, please unmute your microphone. Dr. Mamdouh Salama. The ability of Iran to produce oil and export oil and Iranian resources do not enable them to benefit to a large extent from the international oil market, or to affect politically on OPEC, or to influence the USA. The USA is in a hurry to reach an agreement, a new agreement, and a new nuclear deal with Iran to be able to fully focus and concentrate its attention on China and the Ukrainian crisis, which may extend or expand. From this perspective, the USA seeks to reach an agreement with Iran as soon as possible. However, Iran will not accept this position. I believe 100% that we will not see lifting of American sanctions on Iran anytime soon, or even in the long term. The cause of this is that there is a major gap between the positions of the United States and Iran, which cannot be bridged. Even in light of the USA's need for the energy resources from Iran to make up for the Russian natural gas and oil, even with that. And the cause for this is that the only agreement that is acceptable for Iran is an agreement that meets Iranian terms and conditions, in the sense that it wants the USA to lift positions, to lift all sanctions immediately, and not to add any further restrictions on the Iranian nuclear program, to limit the Iranian nuclear program, or to limit its ability to develop long-range missiles. This is something that will be unacceptable for the USA. That is why it is difficult to see an agreement between them soon. For instance, some people say or exaggerate the ability of Iran to return to the international oil market. Let me remind you here or mention that Iran, even when it was giving the 4 million barrels share when OPEC started the quota system, Iran could not even up till now, it cannot produce 4 million barrels per day, which shows that it doesn't have the ability to do that. Therefore, if under some exceptional circumstances the nuclear deal is restored and a new nuclear deal is signed between Iran and the 5 main countries, I do not believe that Iran has the ability to produce more than 650,000 barrels per day to the international oil market. And this is the gap between what it used to export before the sanctions, which is 1.1 million barrels, and what it exports now, which is 1.1 million barrels, most of which, or two-thirds of which, go to China in a challenge to the American sanctions. So the difference between the two amounts is 650,000 barrels. So speaking of Iran's return after the nuclear deal, it will not really have major of an impact. It will not have a major impact on the global oil market, especially that this market now is reaching a peak of or is already in witnessing massive demand compared to 2014. Secondly, this market, even before the Ukrainian crisis, it has entered into the continuous and exponential growth, which is called a super cycle, in the sense that the current stage is actually witnessing a great deal of demand that may continue throughout the upcoming 10 years. And this will drive Brent crude price to 120 US dollars per barrel. Of course, the Ukrainian crisis has added more than 10 to 30, more than 20 to 30 US dollars. Now, the price of a single barrel of oil is $127, but this is a crazy increase and a temporary one. It will recede once the military operations are halted and peace negotiations start between Ukraine and Russia. From this perspective, the attempts by the US to accelerate reaching a nuclear deal with Iran will not be very useful, and its attempts to return to Venezuela or to use Venezuela to purchase Venezuelan oil that the American refineries were using in the past, this will not succeed because Venezuela will add a key term or a key condition, which is lifting all sanctions on it, not to mention that currently it does not have the ability to expand its production. Where will it go? To the GCC states, which have very limited capabilities, particularly that its production capacity of oil is limited, and the GCC states wants to keep this spare capacity available in case there is a massive imbalance in supply and demand in the global markets. So, speaking of Iran's role in alleviating the skyrocketing oil prices is extremely exaggerated. It is true that Iran has the second largest natural gas reserve in the world. However, it is consuming a major part of it internally in Iran to increase its ability to produce oil. It is injecting this gas into those oil wells, but when it has the ability to establish and extend the pipelines towards Turkey to uh, deliver its products to the uh, European Union, that will be highly effective. However, there's only one pipeline that connects Iran to Ankara and it transports gas from Turkey only. So this is the situation where Iran finds itself in, and the current situation for the world now. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Salama.
سلام.
Dr.
دكتور
Zaid,
زيد، يعني
the
السؤال،
question,
من
if
يعني
we
احنا ننظر لكل
look
هذه
at all of these sides,
الأطراف، تحدثنا
we
عن
have spoken of Turkey, we have spoken of Iran,
إيران
and there are
والأطراف
other sides, and other international players.
من
Who
هي
do you think
برأيك
has the
لماذا
ability,
أيضا
in light of what
في
Dr.
سؤال
Salama said,
هنا
we
طبعا
believe that Iran
إيران
would be
طرف
a winning
واضح.
player in this
برأيك
game.
من هي
Who will be the
الأطراف
winners and the losers
المؤثرة
in the
في
region
المنطقة
with
في
regards
الأزمة
to the
في إيران
situation in and the crisis in
والعمق والمسار؟
Ukraine, and what will determine winning and losing and losing? Thank you very much. Please just allow me to interact for 1 minute with what was highlighted by the intervention by Mr. Kader and by Dr. Salama. I believe, Dr. Sam, that the United States of America is not in a hurry to reach a nuclear deal with Iran in Vienna. And the ability of Russia to shape this deal is very limited. And the energy market or the production of energy in Iran will not make up for the Russian supply. And the United States of America and the NATO, in their attempts to bridge the gap in uh, energy supplies because of the sanctions against Syria and this war, they will take a longer period of time to reach some sort of a ceasefire and to start negotiations. These prices are pushed forward by the psychological issues that have to do with the fluctuations of prices and war. They're not just based on supply and demand, because as we know, these are forward contracts and have been signed for several months ahead. This is what we know so far. Now, once again, Dr. Tissam, and you know my position at least, Russia is a country that is weak. It is a receding power. We call it a gas station with a nuke. It is more like a gas station, it has gas and oil, and they have nuclear weapons. That's it. This is Russia. So the ambitions of Russia, which are being placed in front of us, and some people imagine that Russia can make the measures. Of course, it has the nuclear deterrence, which prevent anyone from direct intervention in Ukraine. And as we said, Ukraine is not a key geopolitical interest for the US, not even for the EU. But that's why the impact of this war on the Middle East, in the way that we are having it in our minds, is that there will be winners and losers. I believe that this is also quite exaggerated. What I can infer from the war today, speaking from the economic aspect and its political impact, is that the countries who owns the energy. That is why GCC states will have actually have a major production of oil. They will have stronger positions, and their ability to increase their shares in production and so on will be subject to change according to the fluctuations of oil and gas energy and their interests with different global powers. But from the geopolitical and geoeconomic aspects, this is something that is we can highlight quickly. But from the political aspect, and this is what matters the most, actually, the war is a losing game for everyone, even if you win. War is costly for the global economy. It's costly in terms of rebuilding trust and confidence and relations. It is very costly at the humanitarian level. There are refugees and impact of having refugees. Who will be receiving those refugees and so on. That is why this represents a major pressure on global economy, and it will cause a great deal of losses for major and small countries. So winning in this case really to be reconsidered from the ethical perspective and from the political perspective as well. Even when we speak of real alliances with Russia in the Middle East, we don't really have a real alliance. We don't have a single country in the Middle East that is a real ally to Russia in the literal sense, including Iran. And these interactions and the disputes that Dr. Zaghul referred to that have surfaced between the two countries is also something that is anticipated. So if we look at the global map, we look at the distribution of powers globally, the world believes that there is a security crisis uh, in Europe. It's called Russia, and in the Middle East we have a security crisis called Iran, and we have also a security crisis in Asia, which is called China. So this is an alliance of need, and it's not really based on joint interests in the genuine sense of the word. So what we have here, that Turkey cannot become a strong ally for Russia at the expense of the West. They have tried to do that, and rehabilitating Turkey and integrating it in the international system and integrating it in the region requires aligning Turkey with the policies of the NATO and the USA, and this is what has been happening. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and Jordan are aligning with the USA. There are quick interests that have been imposed by non-geostrategic developments. What Russia can do in the region in terms of first, the first impact, of course, is the prices of commodities, and this is, of course, important factor. It's important. The skyrocketing commodity prices because of the supply chain and the lack of supply, and also because of the skyrocketing energy prices. And this affect with the production of commodities and transport and so on. This will have a varying impact. Definitely, it will be much stronger on Syria and Lebanon, which rely mainly on wheat exported by Ukraine and Russia. And uh, however, other countries have alternatives with regards to importers and exporters, and also with the cargo routes and supply chains. However, but the increasing prices will affect relatively poor countries, including Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. And this may cause some sort of political interactions, and we know that a major part of which we have seen part of it before COVID-19 and after it. Yes, this is the, now we are moving to the second element. Sorry, I just wanted to say that in terms of winning and losing in this case is a very relative concept, because everybody is a loser in this war due to the impact of war on the Middle East in geostrategic sense. It is limited. And what we see here on the regional sense, regional powers, these are cautious positions now. Nobody is supporting the war, neither geostrategically or politically. However, at the end of the day, sanctions and alliances will develop according to the development of the political positions and so on. I move on to Dr. Qadir. We are also talking about the winning and losing calculations. Dr. Qadir, do you believe that the Russian Western polarization after in the wake of the Ukrainian war will affect the hotspots of conflicts in Syria and Libya? And here we see the coordination agreement, the coordination meeting on Syria, which was held in Washington, and which gathered its European allies and Arab allies and Turkey. What are your expectations for the relationship between Russia and Turkey in the conflict zones? Will it be more tense? Will it be more cooperative?
Thank you for this question again. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yes. So I just wanted to comment about what was said previously about Russia being a gas station with nukes. I think Russia has many more capabilities than that. This has been hybrid war. Russia has cyber capabilities. Russia has diplomatic capabilities. They know how to play they have a huge conventional army. It's not just nukes. And we are seeing that they're having serious trouble in Ukraine. But it is hard to push back against an army like that in a country that's Ukraine, that's not a NATO member. And I think there tends to be a tendency to underestimate how important this is for Europe and for the West, because this is about NATO, this is about the Western alliance, this is about the US promise to revitalize the Western alliance, and it is treated differently, this conflict, than conflicts in Syria and Libya and elsewhere, because it directly impacts the European security structure. And Germany promising to increase its military spending by 100 million euros. It's not easy. It's not something to overlook. And many countries in Europe are rethinking their security. So there will be a new security arrangement. There will be reinforcement of NATO. For a long time, there was a debate about NATO, NATO's future, what NATO was for. I think this war in Ukraine gave NATO a new purpose. So these countries, NATO members, will spend a lot more on their security, and they will try to reinforce the alliance. So I think that dynamic has implications for Turkey. Turkey is a NATO country, and it has spent more than 2% of its GDP in defense, and it has an increasingly strong national defense industry. And we are seeing the products of that industry being sold in many places, and Turkey has successfully deployed its capabilities, both conventional war capabilities and also drones and other capabilities in Libya, in Syria, in South Caucasus. So Turkey was able to balance the situation in Libya and start a political process. In Syria, Russia has been, with the Assad regime, has been pushing towards Idlib, which, if they took over Idlib, that would create several million refugees for Turkey going through Turkey, and that would probably create pressures on Europe as well. So Turkey is holding a line in Syria that prevents the humanitarian situation from becoming even worse than it is right now. And so the Russian attention right now, militarily and diplomatically, is focused on Ukraine, but I don't think they will have a policy change in Libya and Syria anytime soon. For the time being, they don't need to push in Idlib to help Assad retake Idlib, because Turkey is there and Turkey will continue to hold the ground. As I mentioned, there are serious interests on the ground. So for the time being, Russian attention might be elsewhere, but I don't think Russia will change its policy in Libya and Syria anytime soon. The Western pressure weakens Russia, so we will see how much, if it will impact them in these fronts. But at the same time, don't forget that Russian investment in Syria and Russian investment in Libya is very minimal. So it is not unaffordable. But the Russian investment in Ukraine is huge. It's now become a point of national pride. I don't think Putin can give up without taking over Kiev. But regardless, Turkey is trying to broker a deal and ceasefire and trying to prevent a catastrophe that brought us to the brink of a nuclear war already. So, but in the Middle East, Russian military posture, I don't think it will change all that much anytime soon.
Thank you, Dr. Qadir.
constantly.
Before I ask Dr. Zaghul about the same issue, I would like all of you, because now we have started 1 hour since we started, and we have two other key elements that we would like to discuss. So I would like to call upon you to answer briefly, please. Dr. Zaghul, how do you perceive of, sorry, Dr. Zaghul, do you believe that Iran, do you believe that Iran will benefit from Russia's involvement in Ukraine and business in Ukraine, and maybe an attrition that may happen to Russia in its conflict with the West, so that Iran would bolster its influence on Syria at the expense of Russia, and also to exercise pressure on Russia in terms of the nuclear deal? Very briefly, please. It is clear that, at least from the Iranian perspective, there is a number of chances and opportunities and challenges because of this conflict. The Iranians believe that there are very good economic potential for boosting the economic relation between Iran and Russia. And also these economic relations from between 2020 and 2021 reached almost 100% from $2 billion to $4 billion. In case now Russia needs alternative commodities, and Iran may deliver them. In 2025, this may jump even to $8 to $10 billion. This is an economic opportunity for Iran. At the same time, Iran has a major deficiency with regards to food security, and this conflict has added to the walls and the needs that Iran has in terms of the fact that it needs to invest further $20 billion in the upcoming 10 years to achieve food security. So this means that Iran itself will not be in a comfortable position with regards to food security because of this crisis. However, this to a great extent is temporary and can be overcome in case Iran seeks to find alternatives at the regional level. It is true that we know that Russia has adopted a position which is different in Syria compared to what it started with Iran, as they had almost an alliance at the beginning. However, it seemed that Russia is given further sphere and control for Israel to the north of Syria and so on, to achieve some sort of balance. And when Syria reached the level of reconstruction, it seemed that Russia has further concentration on engaging other countries such as the GCC and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE in the establishment and reconstruction of Syria. However, Iran wanted to have a larger share of reconstruction efforts in Syria. This means that there is receding levels of confidence between Iran and Russia, and we have seen the military cooperation in Syria. However, I believe that this crisis may give Iran some further leg room to move more freely in Syria if Russia gets more involved in the Ukrainian conflict in a more extensive manner. From the Iranian perspective, the ongoing war for a long period of time in Ukraine, or having it stopped quickly, is not the standard or the element that will enable Iran to judge the situation. It's actually the sanctions against Russia. The sanctions are against Russia. If they will be increased and become more extensive, then this will be the way for the Iranians. And if these sanctions will be reduced in a certain scope, this will represent another scope. Iranians are not really concerned with the expansion or limitation of the conflict, but they are very concerned with the sanctions, which is separate from the military conflict decision, because it seems that, like, the Europeans have made a strategic decision to reduce the reliance on Russian oil and energy, and this may not be directly linked to the current conflict in Ukraine. The sanctions themselves means that the economic relations between the EU and Russia will be reduced. Here, the Iranians are facing another challenge. They don't want to be facing the American European sanctions because they are cooperating economically with Russia. This is also another determining factor for the Iranians, because the Iranians have just started aspiring to go beyond sanctions. And up till now, there are still some pessimistic views on this. However, at least they have a space for expecting sanctions to be lifted, or at least reaching a nuclear deal, or they actually don't want to be facing further sanctions because of collaborating with Russia economically. In any case, they cannot tolerate this, and this is another element, determining elements for their options. We'll discuss that. Dr. Salama, no doubt, oil producing countries in the region, particularly GCC states, Iraq and Libya and Algeria and Iran, no doubt they will benefit a lot from the skyrocketing oil prices because of the war in Ukraine. And I believe that now this is far beyond $130 per barrel. This is the first time we witnessed this since the year 2008. But there are some analyses which show that this is a temporary rise in oil prices, and historic uh, rates show that such sharp rises in in oil are followed by sharp decreases in a subsequent stage. The question is, how far will oil producing countries in the region among the winners of the conflict that is raging in Ukraine? What are the steps and precautions they should implement to maximize the use and benefits from these major financial income for them? This is a very, very important question. It is preoccupying all decision makers in GCC states under the current circumstances. When oil prices go up, as you know, Dr. Tissam, the oil producing companies in the world benefit, the foremost of which GCC states. And we have noticed the improvement that happened even before Ukraine crisis with the increasing oil rates and oil prices in terms of the budgets of GCC states, and they managed to bridge the gap and address the deficiency in the budgets and increase the investments, and also to set aside part of their income to finance major projects that they need to diversify their sources of income. This is the reality. This is what's happening. However, the crazy oil prices that we're witnessing now and skyrocketing prices, which increased $20 to $30 per barrel compared to its previous growth rates before the Ukrainian crisis, this is a temporary increase. It will disappear once the situation in Ukraine stabilizes, or when both warring sides return to some sort of negotiations and settlement. So the current surplus is limited, because despite the fact that GCC states are benefiting now from the increasing oil prices, but they are paying a great deal of cost to import wheat and to import other material, because GCC states, as you know, import everything, starting from needles until loaves of bread. So when prices go back to the normal trajectory of growth, and I expect oil prices to continue to grow because of the strength of demand and the strength of the global economy in terms of its demand on oil. So in addition to the weakness of the production capacity for oil producing companies to a major extent, so these countries will continue to benefit from the increase in oil prices. But what matters the most is that we do not want GCC states to remain fully reliant only on oil, in the sense that when oil prices go up, they feel that they are happy. And when prices collapse, we feel sad. The GCC states should, and I believe that I've mentioned this before in a number of conferences in the GCC states, what the GCC states want to do is that, of course, oil will remain a key pillar of the GCC states forever, even after they diversify their economy. However, how will they do that? GCC states export raw oil. The best way is to follow the example of Russia in this case, wishes to export 50% of oil as raw oil and 50% of oil as extractions of oil or oil extracts in different forms. And secondly, using solar energy to replace oil and gas in the production of energy and electricity, and desalination plants, as we have hundreds of water desalination plants in the GCC states. Investing, thirdly, GCC states should invest a major part of the income in international companies that are well established and have a bright future and have had a track record of success. Number four, dedicating 5% of the budgets of GCC states collectively and not individually, collectively to be invested in Sudan, which has the third largest agricultural area in the world and has the water of the Nile. This will ensure food security for GCC states, and they can export even what they don't need, they can export it. Sudan is open and able, if GCC states enter Sudan collectively and not individually. GCC states import around 120 billion US dollars of from the United States, most of which from the United States and from other countries, and they can save that money and use it to achieve food security. And it has been proven that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia managed during the time of the late King Faisal to reach self-sufficiency after sanctions were imposed against the USA, and Americans threatened that they will suspend wheat exports and food exports to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and they have succeeded in that. It was costly, but it has proven that if we invest our money locally, we can uh, achieve food security. And this is my perspective. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mamdouh. This was at the expense of subterranean water. I will move on to the second element, and here I would like to have brief answers because we're running out of time. The following element has to do with the ramifications for the regional and political situation and political positions in the region. Dr. Zaid, I would like to ask you a question. Do you believe that the war in Ukraine and the Ukrainian crisis, will it lead to a change in world order? You have said that we will move from a unilateral world order to a multipolar system globally, a multipolar world order. Are we about to witness a multipolar world order, or this is the question that I asked yesterday to the speakers in yesterday's webinar. What will be the nature of this change in the world order, and therefore what will be the ramifications on the regional order and the coalitions, geopolitical coalitions? This Ukrainian crisis, can it lead to boosting Russian Chinese collaboration in the Middle East or in the GCC states in particular, GCC region in particular, especially that so far we don't see any contradiction between the interests of both powers in the GCC region. China will be keen on balancing its relations with its advanced relation with Russia and its trade partnerships with the West. Thank you, Dr. Sam. I will try to be brief and to condensate my answer. The war in Ukraine is an expression of the change of the world order. It is one of the manifestations of the change of the world order. The world as we know, and the international world order, and the prevalent world order now is called the liberal order, which is based on the value-based, a liberal value-based system. and a number of establishments, all of which are Western establishments and organizations, and the revisionist countries such as North Korea, Iran, and such powers which are trying to resist that. So the distribution of power globally, with the different powers of globally, the USA remains the strongest superpower globally. The challenges to the system led by the USA has come from a number of sources. First, internally from the policy of Trump and the divisions between the USA and the NATO, and the transfer from multilateralism to unilateralism and the America First and the populist rhetoric. This has had its impact on the status of the USA globally and thereby weakened the soft power of the USA. Now, given this system where the world is already under the management of the USA, and we have another rising power, which is the United States of America, which is China. The rising power is China, and China is not limited only to its own power. We have also Russia. Russia is a country which is trying to adapt to its new reality, because in its best position, it will be a regional power and not a global power. This global order and these ramifications, this global order, which is the winner in this case is the West, and particularly the USA, revitalizing the NATO, revitalizing the NATO's alliance on the American deterrence. Since World War II, there was no such alliance, but now we are speaking of the need in the West, how the whole of Europe needs the nuclear umbrella of the United States. So this actually will bolster American power in its competition with China and its attempt to contain China. The best interest of China, of course, China and Russia, and then the cyber powers are really the main threats. The world is not just the great powers competitions. We're talking about the new digital game. And I'm speaking of the new digital sphere of influence. There's Russia and China that have a major role in this digital sphere, and therefore the USA, with the management of this crisis, is achieving major gains actually, and the USA will have the Indo-Pacific oceans and not the pivoting toward Asia only. This is an important transformation. The Indo-Pacific Ocean is very quiet as part of that, is a very quiet part of that, of this coalition and the American plan for the management of the international order in the future. What I mean is that the geostrategic positions in this case support to a great extent, and we may reach these analyses from different perspectives. The American vision and the American perspective on the upcoming conflicts in the world, the USA has disposed of many of the burdens it has with regards to Afghanistan. It withdrew its forces from different regions and limiting its involvement in other conflicts to boost its power. This is the strategic position. How will this affect the world? It will definitely cause massive polarization in the Middle East. The question and the key challenge now is what are the perceptions of the Middle East? And we have China, Russia, and the USA. And to what extent can China represent or gain further ground with a coalition in the GCC states? Up till now, with all the strong economic relations, there is excellent economic relations between the GCC states, including Iran, energy with China, but there is not a single strategic agreement in the sense of security between any country and China, because the strategic alliance is with the USA. A very quick question. The crisis in Ukraine caused some sort of the fact that some countries in the EU, particularly Germany, are going to increase their armament. This is something we discussed yesterday, and this may lead to this. We see that they want to increase the number of their army servicemen and increase the concept or the prospect of conscription. Now, Germany can become not just an economic power, it can also become a military power, at least to handle the protection of Europe. Is this something that is excluded during these fluidity and changes? No, of course not. Of course not. This is what happened in the previous two wars in the previous century. Definitely Germany is a strong country, and if it has the opportunity, it has a major sphere of influence. This is something that follows centuries of policy in Germany. However, the main strategic issue here that nobody can contain Russia in Europe except Germany. And Germany, a passive Germany, is unable to contain Russia. The burden, and this is an American demand actually, for two decades at least, they've been demanding the Europeans, and particularly the Germans, to contribute to the financial burdens that have to do with protecting their security. Because the main concept today that the growth of Japan and Europe was based on the fact that the USA handled the security cost of defending those areas and therefore allowed them to invest in economic development. However, this has become a burden. That's why Biden's policy is radically different from Trump. Trump said it very bluntly that you have to pay. Now the Europeans are voluntarily and determined and saying we will pay. So Germany is a strong Germany is always a threat to Europe. But it seemed to them that Germany is well integrated in Europe, and even strong Germany in Europe will continue because Germany is integrated with Europe, and this will achieve the strategic interests of Germany if it is compared to an armed, strong Germany that's in conflict with Europe, because this is the natural balance of power, which will require a strong power to support Germany. So fearing that Germany will have further hegemony on Europe because of reinvesting in the armament and spending on the army, I believe this is theoretically possible, but it's not possible in practical terms. So wasn't it one of the objectives of the USA to stop Nord Stream 2, to segregate the Germans from the Russians? Doesn't the American memory have the concept of the USSR and the alliance with Germany in the First World War? Isn't this one of the invisible objectives? This is beautiful rhetoric, and it can take a discussion that extends to hours. That's the fun part of the discussion, actually. There is intended and unintended objectives, or declared and not declared objectives. Let's imagine that there is an alliance, an economic alliance between the Russians and Germany, and that the Germans will boost their industry, their civilian industries, and their economic power. There is a difference between potential power and actual power with the Russians. This is a major threat for European safety and security, and the security of the USA, of course. It's a threat to them. So just thinking that such an alliance may emerge or exist is a nightmare, actually, for the Europeans first and for the USA secondly. Was the intention of these crises and putting an end to Nord Stream 2 to speak objectively? I believe that despite the potentiality in thinking maybe this may make some sense among some analysts, because some of them believe that Nord Stream and the mainstream actually in the mentality in Germany is quite distant from this concept, because once again, the interest of Germany is in Europe, a unified Europe. Germany is the strongest country in Europe, despite that the absence of the sense of, but Germany can impose the agenda globally, and therefore they can afford the cost and they can invest. So determining that part of the economy should be addressing to or focus on security and defense, it will boost the NATO and will boost European security in general. Thank you very much, Dr. Zaghloul. Thank you very much, Dr. Ziad. Dr. Ziad, thank you very much. Back to Dr. Qadir. Dr. Qadir, it seems that Turkey has found in the Ukrainian war an opportunity to re-establish its position with the NATO and boost its status with the NATO and with the European and the American sides through the confrontation with Russia. My question is, what is the nature of the geopolitical position of Turkey in case the Russian-Western conflict expands? How will the relationship between Turkey and the USA be affected by this, and the relationship between Turkey and the EU? How will it be affected by the developments of the Russian-Western conflict?
Thank you very much for the question again. I think Turkey's position within NATO has always been very strong. Turkey contributed to NATO strongly, NATO missions in the past, and this hasn't changed. Of course, it has been highlighted with the Ukraine crisis. Ukraine is not part of NATO, so no NATO country, has an obligation to protect Ukraine directly. But you're talking about potentially conflict spreading. It depends where it spreads, right? If NATO countries are pulled into this conflict, NATO will have to defend each other. And Turkey is a NATO country. There are 30 NATO countries. Turkey never failed in contributing to NATO missions in the past to collective security of NATO countries. And Turkey has the second largest army in NATO. NATO mission in Afghanistan, if you remember, Turkey is a major contributor, was until the last minute, when the US unilaterally decided to pull out of Afghanistan. So yeah, Turkey's credentials.
But there were some of difficulties in that relation with NATO and with the United States and with Europe in the light of the Syrian crisis and in the light of the refugees. There are many human rights.
Yes, that's why I was going to come to that. So NATO as an institution for Turkey is not a problem. Turkey is a strong partner. But within NATO, the individual countries have different policies, especially towards Syria. In Syria, Turkey and the United States have serious differences, serious problems, especially over the US support for the PKK. In Libya, Turkey had serious differences with Greece and France, who are NATO members. In the South Caucasus conflict, Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, there was no direct European involvement, but the US policymakers in Washington criticized Turkey. Some Europeans criticized Turkey for the support that they gave to Azerbaijan. Yes, Turkey has serious issues with individual NATO partners, and I think that that is driven by regional developments. Look, we are living in a situation, in a post-Arab Spring situation, where there are, almost like failed states in the region, Yemen and Syria, countries that are highly destabilized, and then there are serious security issues, and the West, Europe, have not been able to coordinate with Turkey in the way that they should. And they are finding that now with the Ukraine crisis, they really need to come together on security issues. That may, in the long run, have implications for the regional policies of these Western countries, because the conflict does not stay in the region. It arrives on the shores of Europe through humanitarian crisis, through other matters. Remember, Turkey, several years ago, when Turkey shut down a Russian jet fighter, NATO allies were not very strong standing next to Turkey, and Turkey had a problem with that also. Turkey is worried about, deterrence capabilities of NATO countries, like when a member is perhaps attacked, they may not come together in a serious way. That's a concern for a lot of members, including Turkey. But that's why I was saying earlier, the Ukraine crisis showed that the NATO alliance, these countries better get their act together, and that's what we are seeing. And in terms of the international system, I wanted to just remark that there is a great power competition between United States, China, and Russia, but that gets reflected in the region as sort of regional hedging behavior. The countries like Turkey and others in the Middle East, they have to play a careful game. Even Israel, they have to, because the United States, does not really have a Middle East policy anymore. It tries to extricate itself from the region. It wants to focus on China. So it is not willing to
policy.
Well, it is not willing to push for peace. Peace process in the Palestinian question, for instance. It doesn't try to push for a political solution strongly in Syria. It doesn't try to solve many problems, except it tries to get a deal with Iran. It may happen soon, but it doesn't address the Iranian activities in the region, for instance. So the US is not willing to...
The problem in the region.
The US is not willing to tackle regional problems, and that creates regional hedging behavior, but also allows and pushes the regional players like Turkey, the UAE, and others to start talking to each other, because there's no external actor who will solve these problems in the long run. That's what the region is realizing, in my opinion.
Thank you. Dr. Zaghloul.
Dr. Zaghloul, in light of the potential of increasing competition between Russia and the US in the Middle East in general, and particularly the GCC states, do you believe that Iran will align itself with Russia necessarily, even if there is, even if a nuclear deal is reached, and if the West accepts to integrate Iran in the global economy? In the sense that, is it in its best interest to have an alliance with Russia, or will it be keen on putting a distance between itself and Moscow and try to boost its relation with the West to build its collapsed, to rebuild its collapsed economy? Or will Iran continue to pivot to the East in light of its relationship with China? Briefly, I agree initially with what Dr. Ziad pointed out. The region will witness further polarization. The geopolitical elements and factors can contribute greatly to the disintegration of clarifying the causes of eruption of the conflict in Ukraine. However, I believe from a conceptual theory, or the concept of the establishment of hegemony, it is more capable of providing a conceptual understanding of the ramifications of the conflict in the future. If we say that the confrontation between the USA and China is an economic confrontation, and these powers of the international order, whether it is Russia or Iran in this region, or even North Korea, are putting important allies of the US, putting pressure on them, such as the European allies and GCC states, and also Japan and South Korea to the east of Asia. I believe that further threats by these secondary forces in the international order on these forces will put them in an uncomfortable position in terms of striking a balance between the interests between China and the United States. One way or another, these countries will have to seek the protection of the USA. I believe that we will witness further threats to the powers in the region, whether in the Middle East in general, or also in East Asia, since these powers will also invest in the ongoing confrontation between the West and Russia, to also be able to put pressure on the neighboring countries and achieve some strategic gains. The USA does not perceive of such gains of these countries a threat to the USA, because it can easily pull the rug from under the feet at any point of time when it wants to. But if China achieves any strategic gains from the USA's perspective, definitely it will be difficult to undermine any strategic gains for China, because, as Dr. Zaid pointed out in a very clear manner, I believe that Iran and they have a pessimistic view on the signing of the nuclear deal. A nuclear missile, well, actually, we have seen that a ballistic missile was launched by Iran towards space, and there's in Iran there is pessimism regards signing the nuclear deal. So there will be further escalation by Iran in the region, and they will not be open to the countries of the region. They will support the so-called resistance axis. We may witness many ramifications of these alignments and international alignments in the region here, and Iran here will be a threat towards the countries of the region, and will propel economic blocs in the region towards aligning with looking for protection from the USA to confront this Iranian threat. And these powers will not be in a comfortable position to balance their interests between China and the USA. This is in general. And this will rely on many outcomes. Yes. Now, I move on to the last element that has to do with the challenges and opportunities in the field of energy. Here, I'd like to address the question to Dr. Salama. Dr. Salama, how will the energy prices be affected, especially after OPEC Plus decision to be committed to the rate hike agreement until April? What will be the steps that the OPEC Plus group can implement to reassure global markets? Do you believe that this alliance will continue, or will it face some sort of further American pressure in case we have further pressure by the USA on the key countries here, namely the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE? OPEC Plus will continue its collaboration with Russia and the allies of Russia as long as there is a joint interest between them. This joint interest has led to rising or increasing the role of OPEC Plus as the largest player in the international oil markets. The current situation, let's say that the current situation will continue because of public interest. There are pressures on global oil markets because, as I said in my answer to the first question, OPEC has a limited production capacity, and therefore its ability to increase its production is quite limited. And therefore, there have been many calls by President Biden for OPEC to increase its production. But OPEC cannot increase its production unless they really have to. And this means that there will be an imbalance between supply and demand. So, with regards to the future of oil, which OPEC Plus relies on, and GCC states relies on, oil is the foundation of global economy. It will continue to have this privileged position throughout the 21st century, and maybe even beyond the 21st century, despite the different policies and the harsh policies that are adopted by the European Union to accelerate transformation from oil and gas to renewable energy. I would like to say in conclusion of my answer that there will not be a global economy without oil, and the oil cannot be used without the international economy. So both of them need one another. And until we find a viable and strong alternative to oil and gas, oil will continue to prevail globally throughout the 21st century. Thank you. I would like to see this opportunity to thank you very much for inviting me. I wanted to participate really in this. I wanted to thank you for your invitation, and I'd like to thank you right now. Quite the opposite. I really have three questions, and I hope that you can help me. Dr. Zaid, Dr. Zaghul, and Dr. Qadir, please answer these three questions quickly. Dr. Zaid, do you believe that the economic ramifications of the Ukrainian crisis, with the increasing prices of commodities and the lack of wheat supply, will it lead to social unrest and the so-called bread protests that we have witnessed in the 1980s, especially that the countries of the region have not recovered from the economic ramifications of COVID-19 pandemic? We have seen some protests in Iran that denounce and go against increased prices or the rising prices. Are we going to witness something like that? You very briefly. This is very likely to happen. The crisis has come under very bad situations globally with regards to the global economy and increased prices globally and the disruption of supply chain globally. This is a major challenge and risk for our country, particularly for our countries, particularly for middle income or low income countries. Thank you, Dr. Zaid.
Dr. Zaid.
Dr.
Dr.
Qadir.
Qadir.
Dr. Qadir,
ما
what
هي
is
مناحي
the
تأثير
potential impact of the
الحرب
Ukrainian crisis on
الأوكرانية
the Turkish
الاقتصادية
economy,
خصوصا في
particularly
ضوء
in light
ارتفاع
of
تضخم أسعار الطاقة
increased energy prices
فضلا عن
and in addition to the
35% استهلاك
35%
تركيا
of
من
uh,
الغاز تأتيها
Turkey's gas supplies come
من
from Russia. Do you
اعتقادي
believe that Turkey will
جدا
find
متضررة
alternatives or will be able to
عن
find
الواردات
alternatives to Russian
وتجديد
gas,
الغاز
maybe from Israel,
الاستراتيجي
or
للدول هل
will this
سيؤدي
lead to
ذلك إلى
alleviating the
تعزيز
tension
التوتر مع
with the
دول
Eastern
شرق
Mediterranean
المتوسط
countries to
تعزيز
boost
الاستفادة من
the
الغاز
benefit
في
from
شرق
Eastern
المتوسط
Mediterranean? Do you believe that
واعتقادي أيضا أن
the
تداعيات
ramifications of
التضخم
inflation and
وأسعار
increasing
الطاقة اللي
energy prices
تسير في حكم
will
الرئيس
affect
أردوغان
the
وانسحابه
President
من
Erdogan's
الانتخابات
uh,
التي
chances
ستجري في
in
عام
winning the elections in 2023?
Thank you. Of course, it's always hard to predict. Let me start with the last question. It's hard to predict election results. It has many different dimensions. And Turkey has already, there's already a lot of pressure on the economy, largely because of the pandemic. Turkey has been very, very generous. The government has been very generous with its support for the general public during the pandemic. And that, and when it's combined with the supply chain issues and global inflation and then energy prices, yes, it has consequences, serious consequences for everyone, including Turkey. Alternatives, to be honest, Turkey tries to diversify its energy resources. It is dependent on foreign sources of energy, natural gas and oil. It doesn't have its own natural gas and oil to that extent, but Turkey is trying to diversify, but alternative to Russia is a different story. That's just not really realistic, to be honest. Turkey cannot easily replace Russian gas, and the gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. Improving relations with Israel will help, perhaps, to bring Israeli gas to Turkey and then send it to Europe. But still, that relationship, if things are going bad on the Palestinian side, that relationship may also be difficult. So Turkey's energy needs, finding alternatives is not going to be easy, but sometimes, as you know, that can be an advantage because there's something called oil curse. Maybe we can talk about that on another session. But Turkey has been dealing with high energy prices and dependency on oil and gas from foreign sources for a long time. Good thing about Turkish economy is it's very diversified. There is serious manufacturing, defense, tourism. So Turkey has some other options when it comes to economy, but it will create pressures on everyone, including Turkey.
Including the presidential election as well?
It will, but presidential election, has dynamics about, for instance, who is going to run against Erdogan. Erdogan has been a very successful leader, strong leader for such a long time. He has there is this perception that even only he can, at least among some people in Turkey, in the public, his supporters, only he can solve these problems or meet the challenges of this time. That's why I'm saying it's hard to predict election results, or which is probably a year and a half away, unless there's early elections, which is not really very likely. So we'll have to wait and see.
Right, thank you. Dr. Zaghul,
Dr. Zaghul, how will the war in on Ukraine affect the Iranian economy directly? Will that Iranian economy benefit from the war, particularly with increasing oil and energy prices, and also in the wake of Tehran's offer that it will support the drive to make up for any shortage in oil supplies, and the major benefits that it may have in terms of selling Iranian oil and Iranian commodities? Will the Iranian regime use it internally to build its economy, or will it continue to support its practices the same way after it did in 2015 after reaching the nuclear deal? First, Dr. Tissam, let me highlight that there is a deep economic crisis in Iran, and the Iranian regime is beginning to admit it. The latest leaks show that there is a massive amount of anger that tripled 300% over the past years in Iran, and there is a grave danger, an imminent danger to the internal stability of Iran in the Iranian economy because of the economic options of the Iranian regime. The economic crisis inside Iran is not limited to the scope of the current crisis globally, but they have been the cause of the Iranian policy since the year 1979. So this requires a higher level of leadership to achieve a positive impact on this crisis. This level of leadership is not something that President Raisi can do because he has limited potential and limited authorities in terms of shaping the policies of Iran, because these policies are shaped by Khamenei and the deep state in Iran. So if the deep state in Iran and Khamenei does not take the initiative to reform the economic policies of Iran, definitely the Iranian economy will have no chance of improvement, and that no one can curb the increase in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard control of the economy and the Khamenei's control of the economy as well. So this means that the Iranian economic crisis will continue, and the continuation of sanctions or lifting them will not provide solutions to them. However, the increase in the oil prices now at least will make Iran's budget in 2020 to achieve its objectives in terms of oil revenues, because they thought that they would export 1.2 million barrels per day. Now their export has gone to 600,000 barrels per day, but the value of prices now has, they were selling at lower prices, so they were selling at almost $60. Now we're talking then more than $120, and this difference will boost the Iranian budget. How will Iran invest these economic resources if they materialize, whether through the improvement of economic relations with Russia or by using natural gas? This is very important, and the collaboration with Qatar and so on. If Iran receives economic resources, I have no doubt that Iran will increase its support for its proxies in the region, because so far the regional policies of Iran gives priority to supporting the resistance axis, despite they have a potential for openness in dealing with regional powers and also other powers in the global economy. This is something that will not be done at the expense of the resistance axis, the pivot towards Africa and Asia, but inside the region, still the Iranian priority is the resistance axis, and any economic potential will continue to support this axis, and Iran will invest in the region conflict to impose further terms on them. Thank you, Doctor. In a single sentence, my last question to everyone, including Dr. Salama. Doctor, in a single sentence, please, if you answer this question, what are the lessons learned and the cautionary steps that the GCC states should observe regarding the Ukrainian crisis and the Russian-Western conflict? Diversifying the sources of income and maintaining a distance, an equal distance between the US and Europe on the one hand and China and Russia on the other, and to be able to benefit from all the available opportunities. Thank you. Dr. Zaid, our problems cannot solve by anyone except us, and our challenges are clear. We need to invest to finding the proper solutions. Thank you. Dr. Zahul, finding alignment, internal GCC states, among GCC states, alignment uh, among the GCC states or the Arab group. We need to coordinate our efforts and to find a role for us in this international conflict to be supporting one another. In conclusion, I would like to say that I really enjoyed this webinar and these opinions, these valuable opinions, despite that we're gone beyond the designated time. At the end, I would like to thank all the participants in this webinar for the contributions and the valuable contributions. Dr. Zaid, Dr. Zaid Ayadat, Dr. Mamdouh Salama, Dr. Mohammed Zaghul, Dr. Qadir, who left the webinar because he has another urgent meeting. Thank you very much. I would like to thank each and every one of you, and I would like to thank you for enriching this webinar with these important interventions. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for your patience. I would like to thank all the viewers for their patience and their follow-up of and staying until the end of this webinar. Thank you very much. And until we see you soon, thank you. I would like to thank each and every one of you. Thank you very much, and peace be with all of you. Thank you, Dr. Sam. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.